Hello, everyone. Welcome to our event on Unpacking Election 44, or this past recent federal election. Thank you very much for joining. We'll be starting shortly. I do want to mention that as people are coming in, if you require interpretation, we'll go over the instructions, but you can always go to the bar at the bottom and select the language you'd like to hear in, either English or French, and our interpreters are on standby. So again, welcome everyone. We're so glad to have you at our Unpacking Canada's first federal pandemic election with a pundits panel of young women politicos. This is co-hosted by our good friends Fora Network for Change and us here at YWCA Canada. I do want to take this moment to thank one of our sponsors of Think Big Lead Now, our national leadership program for young women. This is a program that is sponsored by many organizations, including the RBC Foundation. So our gratitude to our sponsors for this program, but also supporting this event through today. My name is Anjum Sultana, and I'm the National Director of Public Policy and Strategic Communications at YWCA Canada. My pronouns are she, her. This has been a federal election season like none other. And one of the resounding questions throughout the election was, what is this election about? But for us, perhaps a more important question is, who is this election about and what will be the legacy? And that is some of what we will be discussing here today. And for us, many of the peoples whose lives are at stake in this election, whose futures are at stake, that will be what we're centering and talking about in our conversation today. And we're so grateful to our panel of incredible advocates and organizers who you will hear from shortly. First, I'd like to take this moment to do a land acknowledgement. And we do a land acknowledgement to honor the First People. We are acknowledging the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples in this area for time immemorial. We must also recognize the harm that settler colonialism has perpetrated on this land and continues to do so against First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We're also connecting today virtually, and these online spaces are not safe for all of us. And we want to also take this moment to remind that these spaces can be used as a tool of oppression against Black, Indigenous, racialized communities, gender and sexual minorities, people with disabilities, newcomers, immigrants and migrants, and many communities who experience intersecting forms of marginalization. So let's all do our part to keep online spaces safer for all of us. Today, we have a fantastic conversation that will be laid out for you in just a minute. We have some opening remarks and housekeeping we want to share. We'll have a panel discussion. We'll also have an opportunity for Q&A, and we'll also have some closing remarks where we'll share some interesting ways to continue the conversation and get engaged in the work of Fora Network for Change and YWCA Canada. So I want to share that this event is being recorded online and we will be posting it on our YouTube channels afterwards, so please stay tuned for that. We also, for this event, as mentioned, have enabled French and English interpretation, as well as closed captioning. For closed captioning, on the lower bar, you can click on closed captioning or CC, and the option should come up to turn on closed captioning. So please do leverage that if you would like. For French interpretation and English interpretation, please be sure to click the button to enable based on the language you prefer. En français, nous faisons de l'interprétation de l'anglais vers le français. Alors, assurez-vous de cliquer sur le bouton pour activer les fonctionnalités. Please note, because we are in webinar mode, you will be able to ask questions through the Q&A function, again on the toolbar. So please do use that throughout the conversation, as our moderator will be continuing to look at that and also use that to inform the discussion. We also encourage you to live tweet. Please use the hashtag ELXN44. And also be sure to tag our panelists, our moderator, our organizations to keep the conversation going online. And finally, if you have any tech issues at all or questions, please be sure to reach out to our colleagues, Kristen and Arissa, who are here to help you and troubleshoot. You can direct message them and they'll be able to support you. And with that, I'd like to take this moment to introduce our fantastic moderator, Bailey Greenspan, who is Director of Programs and Global Engagement at Fora Network for Change. I've had the pleasure of knowing Bailey for a number of years, and she has been at the forefront of some very, very exciting innovation, opportunities, and impact. Bailey is a community-oriented, social impact-driven leader in the nonprofit sector. As mentioned, she's the Director of Programs and Global Engagement at the Fora Network for Change, and previously also served for some time as acting co-CEO. She has been a leader in the space of gender equity and youth leadership in Canada and globally, and has done previously represented Canada in many delegations, including the G20's Women's Engagement Group as a Canadian delegate, as a former advisor to the Ministry for Women and Gender Equality's GBA Plus Forum, and also Canada's G7 Youth Engagement Group. So without further ado, I'd like to call Bailey up on stage virtually and pass it over to her. Thanks again, Bailey.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Anjum, for the nice introduction. It is such a pleasure to co-host this event with you because YWCA Canada has been doing such incredible work during COVID and during, especially around this election, to raise the issues of women and girls, and in particular young women. So it's really an honor to get to share the stage. I am dialing in from my home in Toronto, covered by a dish with one spoon territory, treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee, which has always deeply resonated with me and my responsibilities as a settler. And on that note, I want to just acknowledge that I don't miss the irony in talking today about the land that we're on before diving into a panel that's sort of parsing out the politics of a colonial government. I think that, first of all, that's if that's a conversation that comes up in the questions, I really welcome it and invite it, while also disclaiming that I don't have a lot of answers around that particular, if you will, irony. But I want to acknowledge that. We are going to dive into that conversation in a moment. I just want to take 1 minute to reintroduce my organization. Some of you may know me or may know Girls 20. In August, so just 1 month ago, Girls 20 rebranded to Fora Network for Change, or Fora for short. Fora is the plural of forum. We wanted a name that reflected the space that we hold to hold dialogue, community, and for exchanging ideas. And you can go online and read more about Fora's rebrand on our website. The link was just shared there. Thanks so much. I also want to quickly promote an event that we are doing in about a week and a half, next weekend, October 2nd and 3rd, our Get On Boards Masterclass. So if you're here today because you believe in making democracy and governance stronger, if you have maybe heard about our Girls on Boards program that works to, train and prepare young women and non-binary youth to join community boards, we are holding a 1 weekend masterclass for training and skill development around getting ready to join a board. Once again, the link has been shared. Thank you so much. And we would really love to see you there. It's going to be a super fun and interesting weekend. Now, without further ado, I am very excited to introduce our panelists for today and dive into Election 44. So first of all, I am welcoming Faye Johnstone. Faye Johnstone is a trans feminine writer, activist, and consultant. Over the past 5 years, she's been involved with federal advocacy efforts on trans rights, on banning conversion therapy, and increasing support to the 2S LGBTQ+ community organizations. As a principal consultant with Wisdom to Action, she has led 2S LGBTQ+ capacity building initiatives within community health and social services, and supported 2S LGBTQ+ organizations to grow their capacity and serve their communities. And Faye is based in Ottawa. And I'm also going to introduce Hanan Mohammed. Hanan is an award-winning policy and legal researcher. She has advised political parties, consulted for organizations, and she writes about the need for intersectional and critical race analysis on a freelance basis. Currently, Hanan works with the Canadian Human Rights Commissioner's Office. She's a 2L law student, and she is joining us from Edmonton. So welcome to today's panelists, and please feel free to turn on your mics. I want to invite everyone who is watching, who's dialing in today, to throw your questions into the Q&A as much as possible. I'm going to try and weave them into our conversation. And, this is really meant to be as much as possible a community discussion to talk about something that I think we all love to talk about, which is politics and elections. So yeah, let's dive in. Faye and Hanan, first of all, how are you feeling? I know everyone was up very late on Monday waiting for some results. Some of us are still waiting for results. How are we feeling post-election on Monday?
I think that's a great question. And hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. As I said, my name is Faye Johnstone. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm joining from unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin territory, colonially known as Ottawa. I'm still tired, first and foremost, I think. I stayed up till 2 a.m., like in my bed, scrolling through the CBC News app. I'm paying attention to a few writings in particular. But I think my general takeaway is I'm still wondering why we had an election. And I'm wondering, I think there are things that have changed, and there's a lot that is going to change in the next few months and who knows how many years. But I'm still stuck on the so what actually happened? Like a few writings changed. The seat distribution did shift a little bit, but it feels like the election is almost like 3 months ago already, but it was actually like 2 days ago. And so I'm kind of just like stuck on it feels like it just happened, but it happened ages ago, and here we are.
Yeah. I'll come back to that in a moment, but Hanan, I want to give you a chance to tell us, how tired are you?
Oh my goodness, I completely agree with Faye. My name is Hanan Mohammed. I go by she, her pronouns. I'm on Treaty 6, Edmonton land right now. And for me, I was just in my pajamas the entire time. I didn't order pizza or anything. I was like, let this be over soon because I got to wake up early. But then at the same time, I knew it wouldn't be quick. But when it was, I was disappointed almost. It was very underwhelming, especially, with the whole carrot and the stick that the Liberal government did have, and now they lost the stick, or the carrot, I don't know. But now what are they gonna do? Are they gonna keep threatening an election, or are they actually gonna get down to it and start working with opposition parties? So for me, that was like the underwhelming part, where it was like, this could have been an email. I think someone tweeted that, and I just thought, yeah, this really could have been a really 2-sentence worded email.
So I think it's interesting that you both bring this up, because there was one message that that I thought was good messaging, at least, which was our government has been dealing with this crisis for 18 months, and we actually never had a mandate to be dealing with the enormity of this crisis. So we want to go back there and make sure that we have the mandate to be dealing with the COVID crisis. What do you think? Do you buy that? Does that matter to you? Does it stick with you? What do you think?
Faye, would you like to go first, or should I? I mean, I'm talking already.
Yeah, you can go ahead.
So for me, the issue was really, that's all I could think of. There could have been so many other things that could have been, I guess, the key messaging that was coming out of the Liberals, for instance. I was expecting more of okay, we're noticing a disappointment with ourselves. We're noticing we're not getting a majority. We're seeing that Canadians are frustrated and upset. They want us to get to work. Instead, you saw this kind of shift of okay, this strengthens our mandate. What did it strengthen? I was so confused. And when it came to the Conservatives as well, during Erin O'Toole's victory speech, I was just sitting there now you're campaigning after the election, and also you were treading very lightly, rightfully so. I mean, Albertans were very disappointed and showed that in this election, but seeing that confusion, I think, from both parties. I mean, I am an NDP supporter, so I could be biased that I didn't kind of nitpick Jagmeet's speech. But the other two, I just remember feeling very underwhelmed that there wasn't an acknowledgement of the lack of voters, the lack of youth voters specifically, the patience that minorities have had in regards to our policies not being pushed. Instead, you had this this strengthens the resolve we've had. Like, what? No. So that was my thoughts.
And I think I would agree. I think, before the election, I felt, and throughout COVID, there has been this very important dialogue around the unprecedented impact and disproportionate impact of COVID on racialized folks, on Black folks, on Indigenous folks, on LGBTQ folks, on poor folks. And I think it's really interesting that, that didn't come up during the election. And it's almost like I'm stuck on those folks weren't engaged in this election, right? They weren't spoken to, they didn't turn out in good numbers. I'm also still a little bit peeved Elections Canada for a variety of issues, one of which is issues with student voting. Another of which is they still haven't managed to do justice to trans folks whose names have changed legally, and they've consistently dead named many trans folks across the country. So I think, I've heard the rationale of like, it's never a good thing to complain about democracy. Was this a healthy election? Was this a positive election? Was this an election that brought civic engagement to the fore? I think it was an election where we saw far-right parties and white supremacist groups being more vocal than ever before. And I think that, to me, they didn't win any seats. And so there's some really good things on that front, but it scares me that that wasn't a topic of conversation. And so again, I come back to, I don't know if an election was necessary. And I think it does make sense to some extent. COVID did result in a significant change of government priorities, unprecedented funding to support like CERB, CRB, et cetera. And so I think it does make sense to take the pulse. But our parliamentarians are elected to be representatives of the people, and they always do that on every issue for usually 4 years. So yes, COVID is unprecedented, but it's also governing, and governing is governing. And so I also was kind of shocked at the message of, this is the idea that this pandemic or this election is telling us that, the Liberals need to collaborate more and reach across the aisle. And I'm still stuck on, well, a healthy democracy is already or should already be about collaboration. And we have elected officials who are already intended to speak or represent constituents across the country. And that hasn't changed. And, CERB is like, the pandemic isn't over or anywhere close to, but a lot of the things that the Liberal government did that were particularly significant have already been done or are being done. So why do we need to go back to ratify initiatives that are winding down in many cases and that have already received general support from our House?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an excellent point. And so you brought up a point, and I think that sets us up to dive into this policy discussion. And once again, I'm just you both have dropped many, many, many cookie crumbs for our audience. So I'm gonna once again invite them to start dropping some questions into the Q&A that we can bring into our conversation. But Faye, you mentioned that we've just gone through a crisis. We're still going through a crisis that is disproportionately affect marginalized folks of different intersections of identities and abilities. And you also said that they were missing from this election. So I want to ask both of you, for the communities that you serve and work for, let's talk about what policies, and maybe as you start talking, you can talk a little bit about, who are the communities that you work for and serve. What policies did you see at this election, and what was missing? Hanan, can I flip that big question to you first?
Yes. So for me, I identify as a Muslim. I'm a visible Muslim, as why I wear the hijab. I'm also Somalian, and that means I'm Black as well. And I'm also identify as a woman. And so for me, I think for the last 6 months since December, but prior to that, racism, Islamophobia, and sexism has always been issues affecting me personally, but also how I view the world. And so in December here in Edmonton was like really the first serious hate crime public attack that happened to a mother and a daughter that were outside in their car just trying to go to the bank. And till now, the person is fleeing arrest, even though there's an arrest warrant for them. So we're not even getting into how the justice system doesn't even properly deal with gender-based violence or Islamophobia. Let's just leave that there. But if we're just talking about the pattern of disrespect on Black bodies that has been going on for the last 10 months has been excessive. I was in my first year trying to navigate law school, and I thought, okay, like if no one is going to be angry about this, I feel like I have a privilege here that allows me to be angrier, that let people stop and listen to me because somehow I have an education and it makes it better. I don't even know how. I'm like trying to justify ignorance in that regard, but here I am. And so I wrote my first piece with the Edmonton Journal calling out the Alberta government. And then I called out the Edmonton Municipal City Council. I managed to have actual meetings with those folks. But when I started to go federally and start calling out things, I noticed that there was a lot of hesitation because there was also an election that was probably going to be called, and there was hints of that, and there were these roundtables. Faye can probably also agree, like roundtables to me before elections are the most dehumanizing experience, because here you are yelling and telling someone to take you seriously, and they're not, or saying things out loud because they feel that that could reflect badly on them and their parties. And to be very specific, I'm like pointing a finger at the Liberal Party here. I think that I was very vocal on the National Summit. I was privileged enough to speak there for the Islamophobia Summit. And that was not just because of the family that was mowed down and murdered in London. That was because of Black Muslim women, visible Muslim women as well, being stalked, harassed, beaten in broad daylight, all in broad daylight. And so for me, it was really frustrating to see 60 policies being put out by the community, and I know everyone that has been like nitpicking and trying to get those policies reviewed, it being presented like, here you go, at least say you endorse it, or at least say you want to do one or two or three of them, and then instead you get on like a national debate stage, debates of a bill that is known to be, and rightfully so, known to be sanctioned religious discrimination and not being justified on national TV. Like, I paid to see that. Like,
and just to clarify, we're talking about Bill 21 in Quebec, which I think, to say the least, we would like to see our national party leaders take a much clearer stand on. Hanan, what would you have liked to see happen on that stage in regards to Bill 21?
Instead of calling out the person of color that was asking the question and saying that question isn't a good question and it demands too much accountability and ignores the historical significance of Quebec, all of these things are there. Instead, they ignored that people like me, you know what, not even people like me, myself, I'm studying law. I can't practice law in Quebec because I wear a headscarf. That's how close this is. And seeing, you know, the NDP also take like a, what was it? I don't even want to call it wish-washy. It was very clear that they didn't want to say anything. And the Greens actually taking a more stronger approach on it really surprised me. And it showed me in my community that if we vote or if we don't vote, what does it make a difference for us? And I know that is a clear reason why some of my friends and my peers didn't vote this election. And I don't blame them for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Wow, thank you for sharing that, Hanan. I think that was a very powerful moment in the debate, both to show the country who the leader of the Greens was, Paul, someone who was going to kind of stand up and talk about racism, but also it was, I think, for the rest of Canada, this really shameful moment, certainly in the election, one that'll stand out for me for a long time. Faye, I want to ask you the same question around, what policies did you see? What didn't you see? Go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. So my work is always grounded and not like exclusive to, but very focused on 2S LGBTQ communities and justice for trans and gender diverse folks in particular. And I think, you know, we've seen in the lead up to the election, we have seen, and around the world, in fact, we've seen a lot more aggressive anti-trans organizing, anti-2S LGBTQ organizing. And I think one thing, you know, we talk, this election, I think was a bit of a failure on anti-hate. I think through and through, we saw leaders who weren't willing to denounce acts that were hateful, statements from other party leaders that I would argue were hateful or that were dog whistles to hate-based groups. And so I think one thing that I think folks don't necessarily realize when we talk about hate is how prevalent hate is and how much of it gets you to a point where you don't even bother telling anyone it happens anymore. When we talk about hate, we talk about, a lot of the time it's the big, like just like terrifying and despicable headlines, but we don't talk about hate when it's normalized every single day. 84% of trans people avoid public space because of fears of harassment and discrimination. That is hate-based violence to me. That is violence because if you're going outside and people are staring at you and people are yelling at you and people are following you, that makes it so you can't participate in civic life, in public space, or in our society more broadly. And I think that sets a bit of a context for the fact and the absolute failure of all of our parties to talk on 2SLGQ issues this election. There is a lot of very organized 2SLGQ communities across this country and organizations that are seeing these crises in community. And I think we have this impression in Canada that LGBTQ people are all cisgender white gay men. And cisgender white gay men have a lot of stuff going on and need support and services. There's issues of isolation, mental health, substance use. We need care and compassion. But when our only frame of reference, and particularly on the Hill, where those are the only diverse sexual orientations and identities given much space, when that's your only frame of reference, of course, your policies are only going to speak to that community. And so through the election, it seemed like when I look at my community, I see folks who, again, are afraid to leave the house. I see folks who are poor. I've had trans kids crash on my couch because they're afraid to access a shelter system. I have friends who are struggling to make ends meet and pay their bills every day, every month, and have been for ages on end because they can't find jobs because they're visibly trans or gender nonconforming. And so then we have a political environment where every party couldn't even be bothered to speak to 2SLGQ issues. They all showed up a month before, like during the Pride Parade, they were having a good time. They were taking their photo ops. They were, living and breathing, gay pride, woohoo. But then their platforms seem to barely speak to our issues. And even beyond the platforms, the leaders across the board, I swear to God, I couldn't get any of them to even say the word trans, let alone transphobia, let alone condemn acts of transphobic violence. 2 candidates this election had signs defaced with anti-trans stickers. One of them was a trans candidate in Manitoba. Another was my local NDP candidate here in Ottawa, Vanier, who is a cis woman who was dragged in the National Post for daring to say that trans people deserve rights and deserve access to gender-based space. And so we couldn't see leaders who would even denounce those things. But more specifically around policies, the only policy that got much attention on 2SLGQ issues this election was conversion therapy. Conversion therapy is a horrific practice that continues in this country, but it's not the only issue. And the entire debate revolves around not how do we ban conversion therapy, not how do we support survivors. The Liberals use conversion therapy to attack conservatives. The Conservatives blame the Liberals for delaying and calling an election that ended the conversion therapy bill that we were working on. And so we couldn't even engage in substantive discussion. And at the end of the day, legislation doesn't actually change lives. Legislation is good, is important. We need concrete, comprehensive legislation to ban conversion therapy. There is no doubt about that. But that's not going to support the survivors who've been traumatized by this practice. And that's also not actually going to shut down instances of conversion therapy, because conversion therapists are sneaky. They're not going to say, hey, I'm going to put you through electroshock therapy. They're going to do it in church basements. They're going to do it behind closed doors. They're going to do it in contexts where it isn't identified or understood as conversion therapy. So what we actually need is prevention and supports for survivors. And that's just one issue. And so the only issue on 2SLGQ rights that was brought up this election is one that was used for cheap political points rather than any centering of the rights of our people or our communities. And that to me is genuinely just heartbreaking and deeply disappointing for party leaders who really love those photo ops during Pride parades.
Faye, thank you. And yeah, and I see Hanan and I are both nodding. I just want to take a minute. First of all, just want to say that I'm really in awe of both of you. I think both of you are joining this panel to talk about how much the political process has, what's the opposite of not made it open? Whatever the opposite of that is. And you're both here banging the doors down, and I'm just really in awe of both of you. I want to take that question. I want to incorporate a question that came in from Ellen Woodsworth, and it's around process, which is always my favorite thing. How are we going to get stuff done? The question is, we have a minority government where once again, the NDP is holding the balance of power. We've talked about what needs to change. What what can we move, especially recognizing now we have a minority government again, where we maybe have 18, 24 months until we have another election. What tactically can we do? And when I say we, I'm going to include myself on behalf of the nonprofit sector, who will be your allies, to get, what can we get done in 18 months with the NDP sort of holding power here in a minority government? And I'll let you both sit with that question. Whoever wants to jump in first, feel free to go ahead.
Well, I mean, I can start. I think for me, and this is just a personal thing, I like it when folks are bold and they don't think of, I guess, consequences outside of making things equitable. For instance, I think one of the strongest moments with the NDP that has stuck with me was when Jagmeet was calling one of the members in parliament a racist. To me, it wasn't just like the context of how that has happened that stuck with me. It was the courage that he displayed to do that. And then afterwards to hold a press conference and then talk about the issues of racism that was happening, talk about what happened to Joyce in medical negligence in Quebec, talk about missing and murdered Indigenous women. Like now it gave him and it gave folks that were already screaming about these issues more leverage and more, I guess, I don't want to call it publicity, but more limelight. And even during this election, like he said, he didn't want to make it about him when he was talking about the mass graves that we have here in Canada that still haven't been charged or have a special office for prosecution for. We're not even getting into that. But he kept making it clear that this wasn't about him scoring any cheap political points. It was just doing something that was right and wrong. And so for me, I wish and I hope for more bold action from folks that are in the NDP government right now, but also folks that were running and didn't get a seat. I think that just because you ran and you didn't get a position, I hope that you can still engage with your communities as you have. I know so many folks that have been running and have made Twitter accounts and TikToks, and a lot of people show flack towards the NDP for making a TikTok account and all that. But to me, I think what better way to engage 40% of a demographic that is youth, that is known to be using that app, that also didn't show out to vote than that app, right? So I hope there's more bold action. I hope there's more sympathy. I also don't like town halls. So I don't know if Faye has any great solutions to that. For me, I personally like it when there is like a group of folks that are already meeting to do action, and then, you know, there is an invite for politicians to come in. That's what I formally use. But Faye, I'd love to hear your suggestions.
I think it's about, you know, especially the Liberal government loves to say this is community-led, community-driven. We talked to community and we made this happen with them. And they've said that time and again. And I can actually get into the specifics and be like, so who did they talk to? Because like, I'm not saying I know every 2SLGBTQ advocate or activist, and there's a lot of organizations out there, but like we talk to one another and we talk to each other quite a bit. And so when they say community-led, I think it's important to push them on what that means. Does that mean that they chatted with 2 people and then wrote a bill? Or does it mean they sat down with organizations, legal experts, and community activists to shape something that would truly reflect what we needed? And so I think that's one piece. I think around where we go from here, I think I struggle on 2SLGBTQ issues in particular. There is always a bit of a dance of who's going to talk about us, who's going to put us on the agenda. And that's a struggle both within nonprofit and feminist sectors and within federal advocacy and government relations. My hope and my ask for nonprofit folks is always, please go to the 2SLGBTQ organizations and ask them what they're fighting for. We've been fighting for $25 million a year in annual federal investment in 2SLGBTQ community organizations. These organizations are chronically underfunded. They provide essential services like health navigation, like peer support, housing support. They run food banks. And they are the ones who find a place for that trans kid to crash on the couch when they're kicked out from their parents' place. Those organizations, similarly to the history of the feminist sector, are deeply and chronically underfunded and almost always have been. As the feminist sector has emerged and grown over the past decade in particular, and particularly under this current government, we need to see those same processes and investments happening for 2SLGBTQ communities. It's not enough, you know, and again, this government has been very good at the big words. They love to say, we passed the trans rights bill, we apologize for the purge. And those are important moments. And I do want to, you know, thank them for the impact of those moments. But we're also coming after a decade of Harper who couldn't be bothered to touch anything gay with a 10-foot pole. And so we actually need the bar to be higher. And unfortunately, there aren't vibrant, like 2SLHQ organizations are underfunded and don't have access to the platforms that other organizations do. And so we need people to be putting pressure on not just inclusive approaches that factor into LGBTQ people, but policy interventions that are particular and targeted at improving health, safety, justice, and well-being for our communities. That on a local level, that on a provincial and national level, I think that is where some magic can happen. And we have an opportunity. We have a NDP, the NDP may indeed hold the balance of power. We've got a Liberal government that likes to use the big words, use those big words and hold them accountable to them. But that requires the NDP to actually push for real investment. And I love the NDP in many a way, and they've done some great work on 2SLHQ issues over the past decades. They have been some of our leaders in this movement on a political level. But I would also say that they're really quiet sometimes. And when I see one of their candidates getting their signs defaced, I wonder why Jagmeet hasn't responded. And when their platform on 2SLHQ issues seems to be something they never talk about, even if it's there on paper, I wonder where are they when we need them most? They have the most 2SLHQ candidates, but most of them still ran in ridings they won't win with it. And so again, it comes back to, if we're talking about progressive parties and parties that care about social justice, I don't want to just hear the words. I want the NDP to be criticizing the conversion therapy bill the Liberals put forward for not being all ages, for not initially being trans inclusive. I also want them to be the ones saying, hey, why are you just doing a bill? You are government. You can introduce the targeted fund for survivors. You could have done that 6 months ago. You could have done that 6 years ago. And those are the questions I wish we had the NDP and other progressive parties asking.
Sounds like we need them listening to this panel. I am, and then you brought something up around about sort of the power of candidates who ran. And I'm thinking a lot about the infrastructure, especially when, there's I'm just going to keep predicting 18 to 24 months till the next election. There's also, an exciting moment, energy in the air in Alberta with provincial and municipal elections coming up. I want to ask, is there a moment in Alberta to be working with the Conservative Party to advance any of, yeah, I know, it's crazy, to be, advancing any of our agendas?
So, well, I like to give examples of real things that are happening instead of thinking theoretically, because then it gives a lot of hypotheticals. So for instance, with the hate crimes that have been happening, we do have our first Black Minister of Justice here in Alberta, and the proposals arising from his ministry are pepper spray, which we all know is illegal. So to give Black hijabi women pepper spray, which we know is illegal, to spray on someone who is trying to commit a hate crime on them, won't that criminalize them in the same time while also harming someone? I'm not even gonna get into the logic of it and how that was even confounded upon, but it reflects on who he sought out to ask these questions to. And I think his task force was majority white cis men that were all in the police force. So it wasn't even community members who were able to sit down and engage with him and say, like, this is not something that we want. So this is what's happening now. But I think for me, one of my biggest excitements, I should have said this earlier, was the mini orange wave, that's what I was calling it, where even if we didn't see this boost in great NDP candidates being selected here from Alberta, instead, we've gotten more momentum. So what I mean by that is, like, in areas such as, I think it was Riverbend, Edmonton Center, and Edmonton, Gersterback as well. Those are 3 areas where everyone was, and Manning as well, oh my goodness. Those are 4 areas where everyone was hoping would flip. Strathcona, I shouldn't leave them out. They're always flipping, they're always NDP, but only one flipped, but the others were very, very close. And so that kind of reinvigorated municipal politics right now. Now people are starting to look at their municipal candidates and saying, okay, well, who is more likely to pass progressive policies that's going to address the opioid crisis that we have now, the houseless crisis that we're having right now, the mass economic GDP structure that has failed Alberta, which, it is from, in my opinion, a result of oil and gas propaganda that is taken up this province for decades. And so now we're seeing a break in the mold of Alberta that a lot of people are ignoring. Like a 14% or is it 17% decrease of Conservative base is huge. Granted, like 5% almost went to the PPC. We're not really that engaged with that for a second, but a 7% increase for the NDP is reflective not just in federal politics, it's also provincial and municipal as well. And we're already seeing Rachel Notley's government, opposition party, try to capitalize on this. We're seeing them literally go after Jason Kenney on stuff that he has said months ago, years ago, before he was even elected, saying, you said that you would never do this, and here you are doing that. And a huge reflection that this stuff is working is yesterday's cabinet switched. I'm not even gonna call it a shuffle, just a switch between this Minister of Health who has proven himself incompetent and a Minister of Labor who has also proven himself incompetent. And they switched ministries, but it showed that Jason Kenney is scared. And not just the polling showing this as well. I think he's running less than 40% in Alberta, which is like lowest premier in Canada. But I'm really excited to see how our province now is starting to, maybe, this is me being very wishful, maybe starting to be one of the more progressive spaces in Canada. Hopefully, we'll see. We didn't see that from the Maritimes this election. I was really upset with that, but hopefully we can see like real community grassroots change happen here in Alberta. And we're, again, when I mentioned progressive candidates that were running that didn't get elected, that doesn't mean that they should stop connecting with communities that they've built these relationships with, because now you're seeing them work with municipal people that are running. So I know Ahmed Nomadic is someone who's running in the same area that Blake, the person who won Edmonton Gastric, the MP there, new MP there. Now that he's helping him campaign for his election for candidacy. You're seeing Janice Irwin, who's someone who's in provincial politics as well, working. They have the three of them doing it together. Like, it shows that there shouldn't be this disconnect when you're trying to make sure that progressive policies are actually entering all levels of government and not just nationally.
Yeah, fantastic. I love being super Ontario over here and having like the Alberta whisperer bringing us to the grassroots of Alberta.
Like, not a terrible thing, you know? It's like, oh, okay, like I mean, it's still a little bit, but like little hints of progress in Alberta as an Ontarian who is very much maybe not the right person to be like, oh, good job, Alberta, but like it's movement is a good thing.
Yeah, and I will say that Twitter is pretty hard on Alberta, and people from Alberta are always like, we live here.
And there's local folks doing incredible work, right? And I think that it is always a struggle in every province, and there's our communities and community folks making magic happen.
Absolutely. This is a testament to that. There is a question that keeps popping up, and I know that everyone is thinking about it. Everyone wants to talk about it. It was a huge upset, if you will. That's what CBC calls it. The question is around Minister Mariam Monsef, no longer minister, who was the Minister for Women and Gender Equality, also responsible for funds for 2S LGBTQ organizations, has played a significant role in growing this file from an agency to a department over the last 6 years. She lost her seat. And then I should also say, first Afghani Canadian woman MP representing Peterborough. She lost her seat on Monday. And I think that all of us in the sector are wondering what does this mean? What does this mean for our work? And what does this mean for, the progress that we've made? I've chatted a bit with each of you about this or about her file. So how are we feeling?
I think my quick take is, I think, she did do a lot of really good work, and I really hope that we see a voice in that file who can continue doing that work, and, acknowledging that a feminist agenda is never achieved and won't be achieved in the mandate of any single government. I want somebody who will keep carrying that torch, and again, push for those fiscal investments that actually are, more than anything else, I think our communities and our organizations need. It's funding. It's funding for services, funding for networking, for advocacy, and I hope that I want a powerhouse. She was a powerhouse, and so I want a powerhouse in her as our next Minister of Women and Gender Equity.
Yes. Co-sign to that. Yeah.
I completely agree with what Faye said. Honestly, it disappoints me that even before the election, polling was showing that she wasn't doing well in her writing. I feel that the Liberals really dropped the ball in trying to reinvigorate her again, not just her, but her base as well. Like it really shocked a lot of people down here in Alberta, mostly because we didn't know that the polling was doing not so well, right? And so I think that if there was more of support for her when she was going through the whole, Taliban scandal or whatever the heck they want to call it, it was really just her and her staff, in my opinion, that were really trying to deal with that. So if there was more leadership in regards to supporting women, and Justin Trudeau actually doing the damn thing of supporting women, this probably wouldn't have been as bad. I think like the difference wouldn't have been that bad. But yeah, it's disappointing.
I also think it's really interesting, like, if I go through manuscripts of or transcripts of the House of Commons, like I can find a lot of things that conservative MPs have said that are quite blatantly racist, I would say, and transphobic, or like dog whistles, right? And so Mayor Monsef makes one mistake and it becomes a headline, and I don't think that can be the case without attributing that to racism and misogyny. And I think that was turned into almost like there was a glee almost that arose from the far right, from right-wing politicians, and also from our media around like folks really wanted to make this into an issue. And it shows I think the very fine line that we expect women, and particularly racialized women, to walk in those spaces where they have to say the perfect things in the perfect moment. And if they don't, their careers can be put into question, and that will be used. And I can just imagine, I doubt the candidates in her riding would have said these things, but I bet their volunteers did and probably made some comments, and it came up on the doorstep. And I think that is also a question. It's not just about what the candidates say, it's about what they let their volunteers say on the doorstep.
Exactly. Like what Faye is saying just brought into my mind again that if you have racialized women running in your party, like wouldn't you have the infrastructure for safety plans for things like this? Like there will always be media gotchas that will try to happen. And I don't even think this was a gotcha. This was just like pure blatant racism and Islamophobia on behalf of Canadian media that took up this story. Like anyone that wrote about it, I was just disgusted that you didn't even see the tears in her eyes while she was talking about how traumatic this is for her. So, but the fact that there isn't a safety plan and you're saying that you support women in your party, especially racialized women, that's a dangerous position to put them in. And I don't even want to think about the amount of heartbreak that she had to deal with behind the scenes that we didn't even see, and the Afghani community as well.
I think just the layer of heartbreak for what could be with having an advocate for Afghani women and girls in place once this government got back to work. I think for me that has been that feels like a loss of potential and a loss of opportunity. A question just popped in very simply: who will be the next Minister of Women and Gender Equality? And I don't know if we're
really placing bets here. Like if I get it right, do I get something out of it? Because like I will guess in that case.
Maybe YWCA will send you a free pin if you win.
Right, I do. So I wonder, like, I think I have not gone through the whole candidate list, and I think there's some really great NDP women who would make a great fit for that role. But I have a feeling that's not going to happen in any government in the 21st century. But I think, Barda Shagar did a lot of good work as the diversity, inclusion, and youth minister. And she's unflappable, which is like more power to her. And I think she would be phenomenal in that space. I would love it to not, like, identity isn't everything. It better not be a dude. I think I'll have a whole lot of questions if it is. And I also think that white women take up a lot of space in those moments and movements, and it might be better for it not to be a white woman in this moment. Particularly after COVID, I think that would be a good way to go.
Yeah, I was going to say Bardish as well. I think Bardish, from my experience, has always been interacting with Mariam Monsef on a really personal level as well. So not only does she understand all the work that Mariam was doing, but also sees multiple different lenses. Like I remember in various town halls that we did for Islamophobia, there would be brought up discussions of disabled Muslims, there'd be brought up discussions of trans Muslim folks as well. And so I think Bardish has like a wider lens. I'm not saying that everyone has to have that, but it's a benefit for us if someone has a wider scope and can vouch for the intersectionality component for a file this big that we're going to need for a feminist recovery.
Oh, Faye, you're on mute.
Faye, you're still on mute.
You're still on mute somehow. Tech, can you help us out? I love watching Faye speak on mute. That is so animated. I'm going to jump in and place my bet while we continue to have you on mute. I was just looking up the name. It is a new MP for London, Liberal MP. I believe on Instagram her name is IMK, and I think it'd be nice to see, you know, fresh face. I believe that she's a former city councillor in London. In the role could be, you know, could be an interesting opportunity for civil society movement to push and bring forward our many demands, which we're about to get into. Faye, are you able to unmute now? No. All right. I imagine tech support is on you. I want to take this moment while we sort this out to invite Anjum back into the conversation. Anjum, if you want to join us and turn on your screen for a moment. There are a few questions that are coming in around the wage file, and I think that there is no one in this country better suited than you, suddenly we have two Fays, to talk a little bit about what we can expect from the wage file. One of the questions that's coming up is, what happened to the she-covery? And with a new minister, what do we want to accomplish? So yeah, I'd love to have you weigh in on that.
Absolutely. There was a lot of unfinished business as we went into our first federal pandemic election. And my hope is for whoever comes into the file, for the work that will start again when Parliament is back in session, that this is not forgotten. Like, this is actually the issue. And I know someone in the Q&A talked about, before the election, this was everywhere. We were talking about it, and also talking about the importance of having an intersectional lens on what a feminist recovery needs to look like in this country. There was some conversation about childcare, but let's not forget, and everyone here has talked about it, you can't have an economic recovery in a climate of hate, fear, and violence. That cannot happen. We cannot have an inclusive recovery if we don't address that. So we need to look at social and economic policy together. Childcare. Before we went into the election, we had many bilateral agreements with 8 jurisdictions across the country that we need to go back to the table and see what's happening there. We also need to look at a national action plan to end gender-based violence. That was one of the big conversations even before going into the election as well. So my focus is on those 2 files in particular. I think we also need to talk about young people and how do we prevent a lockdown generation. This is something many organizations have been talking about. I know we've all talked about the importance of young people in this pandemic who have been forgotten about in the election. And my fear is we also need that to be focused on in the post-pandemic recovery as well. So these are some of the unfinished business that hasn't been addressed. And I think as civil society, it's our job, as soon as Parliament's back in session, and even now, I was talking to a couple colleagues, you know, now is our moment to influence the mandate letters. Now is our moment to influence who we want in cabinet. So I think in some ways it's a reset for us to reintroduce ourselves to government, but also say, you need to get back to work. Things are waiting for our communities, and we can help you, but you need to be at the table as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And do you want to share your prediction for who the next minister will be? We've got 2 for Stagger.
You know, my hope is, someone also mentioned this in the chat, there was 3 cabinet ministers that did not get reelected. 3 women, 1 woman of color. So I think that's the last thing, right, that we need to see in this upcoming Parliament. So my hope is perhaps a new face that we haven't seen before. And my hope is someone who is can speak to experiences of marginalization, because I think that's that's important for us. We need people who have lived experience and expertise in that role. So my hope is for someone with that who fits that bill.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we will be eagerly awaiting those. And thank you for bringing up the point around influencing the mandate letters. I think this is the moment to build on those relationships that we have, and push for the demands that we've been making for the last year and a half of this crisis. Since you brought up gender-based violence, I want to sort of use our last few minutes to talk about sort of one of the juicier topics on this campaign, which is, in my head, in my memory, a bit of a watershed moment for our movement. There were a number of candidates from multiple parties who were accused of, or in some cases charged of, sexual assault. And as a result, I would say, of enormous pressure from our movements, from our communities, were dropped as candidates. In my recent memory, this feels like a big moment. It feels like a moment where we are starting to be listened to and starting to have some political power to influence having violent and abusive and powerful people be held accountable. But I want to ask everyone, Anjum included, first of all, let me ask, I'll turn this to Faye because we talked about this a little bit earlier today. Is this indeed a watershed moment, or is this a blip? Should I stop reading into it? What do you think?
Awesome. I'm back. Thank you for your patience as my entire laptop just decided to die. But I'm on my phone now, so we're good to go. I hope it's a watershed moment, but I'm worried that it actually isn't. I think, the MP, the candidate in question was, or in one of them in particular, was still elected. I think what the ask now for us and for our movement is, if we know this person needs to resign, can we make it happen? I think we can. I think if we're loud enough and we're angry enough, I think he has no business being an elected official. And I think that actually is the test to me of, is this a watershed moment or is this a blip? I think the media is gonna, use anything they can during an election to cause a candidate problems. And I think in this time, it was a good reason to, and I think it made sense to. But I also don't think that necessarily means that culture has changed. I think it means that a few journalists have realized that misogyny and blatant sexism probably shouldn't be something that we value in an elected official. But then also, if you look at a bunch of other candidates, we got sexist elected to office already, and in this election anyways. So I hope the bar is moving in a good direction, but I don't know if we're at a watershed at any point.
Yeah, I completely agree with Faye. I don't think that this is reflective of any watershed movement until this person who was elected actually puts out a statement and resigns. That's the only way I can say with my chest that Canadian politics is a space where if you do violence against women, you will be held accountable. And granted, the media was referring to this as not being guilty, and it wasn't, we went to trial, it was fine. I think that a lot of people forget how to interpret the justice system in regards to gender-based violence, and I think this opens the door for organizations such as YWCA to start talking about how the justice system has failed women in that regards, but also holding people accountable so that when they do run, they can somehow have this, no, I was proven not guilty, I'm fine. So I hope in the next few weeks, not even weeks, this week, it's Wednesday, let's see if it happens, or any sort of condemnation from the Liberal Party encouraging this person to resign. But I don't think the Prime Minister of Canada can say with their chest that he supports feminism when this just happened, and still no comment from his party or him.
And I know I think we're running out of time, but I do want to say, the culture on the Hill is and has been toxic. And I know too many folks, I am not a staffer, and I thankfully have never been one and never will be one. But we have all heard the stories living in this city, living and being engaged in federal politics. And until those stories stop happening, one candidate won't make or break the difference.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you. Anjum, do you have final thoughts on that?
Yeah, and absolutely, everything that was said here, absolutely great. I think also, what does this mean for people who want to advocate? How do we make spaces for policy and advocacy safer? I think this is this is something we need all parties to talk about, because it is a system that was not built for us. So how do we ensure that we can thrive in those spaces as folks who are parliamentarians, but also as folks who are constituents, right? I can imagine if someone is your elected official and this is the history, how comfortable would you feel to share what you need from your elected official, right? I think it's about making all of politics safer, and it starts with, yes, candidates, but also about the culture on Parliament Hill, but also what it means to be members of civil society so you can do your work safer.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that is like a really great rallying cry for us to end off on. We are all advocates here, and whether we're coming from the nonprofit sector, the policy space, law, and I think that is really our call to action. I feel very hopeful actually going into this. I know that a lot of people felt like this election should have been an email, but I also feel that with every election, even ones that maybe shouldn't have happened, we have the opportunity to bring new people into Ottawa. Every person who won a seat, who is younger, who is bringing different lived experience that hasn't been in Ottawa before, people who are bringing new kinds of political experience, new ways of doing politics, has me so hyped about the 44th Parliament. And yeah, and you know, we'll keep checking in, we'll keep talking to each other, and we'll keep figuring out how to get what we want, how to get our demands. Every time I say get our demands, I feel so radical, but that's what they are. So I'm going to turn it over to Anjum now to wrap up. Hanan and Faye, to be in your presence is just an extraordinary honor. So thank you both. Thank you. And I will turn it over to Anjum.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. And I must say, Bailey, thank you for a phenomenal moderation. And it was just an amazing discussion. And it's always a pleasure working with the Fora Network for Change. And I know for both of our organizations, investing in young people in this country, that is one of the pathways we see to ensuring a more inclusive society, to ensuring more civic engagement, to ensuring we also do that work in between elections, right? So we're not just at the ballot box, but also at budget time and everything in between. So with that, again, thank you to our incredible panelists as well. I've learned immensely, and I know many people in the audience really appreciated the dialogue, the hot takes, but also about what we need to be doing as members of civil society in this next 44th Parliament. And as well, our community is really passionate about keeping the pressure on around gender equity. And we hope you'll continue to join and support our work and fuel our national advocacy. I wanted to take this moment to also highlight that we are in the midst of an application process for our Think Big, Lead Now Young Women's National Leadership Program, which is all about supporting the next generation of leaders so they can advocate, they can ensure a more inclusive society, and also learn about what it means to be a leader and what type of leader they want to be in all aspects of society. So it is a comprehensive bilingual leadership program. It's designed for youth by youth. It's grounded in intersectional feminism and social justice. Our goal is to educate, mentor, and support young women and non-binary youth leaders aged 16 to 25 years old across Canada. And this is a place where you will get access to amazing speakers and facilitators. You will be able to network with like-minded activists from coast to coast to coast. And you'll also learn about what type of leader you want to be in advancing the mission of gender equity. So if you're interested, please do put in an application, circulate this to your networks, circulate this to young people in your lives. Our application closes October 11th. I believe my colleagues are putting in a link in the chat. So definitely please do reach out, and thank you to one of our sponsors, RBC Foundation, for supporting that program. So with that, again, thank you to our incredible moderator, Bailey. Thank you to our panelists, Faye and Hanan. I want to say this event would not be possible without the team members at Fora Network for Change and YWCA Canada. In particular, special thank you to Princess Owusu, Hamzia Babazeba, and Jenny Cloutier. And of course, the stars behind the scenes. Special thank you to Kristen Stowe and Arissa Mayrink, and our interpretation team, Michael Jackson and Gerard Baco-Villard. With that, thank you, everyone, and take good care.